If there's one thing that I think about while playing the Spider-Man 2 game is why. I'm gonna go over a few things I felt about this game while playing it, and then I took a break about a week, and then I returned to it to go through 100%ing or platinuming the game. I did play this game at launch, and there have been a few updates since then. But I'll start off saying that the first game is one of my favorite games of all time, so coming into this one, I had high hopes, and honestly, that's an understatement. I'll have a ton of complaints and points where I think Game 1 did it better, and a few things that I think this game did better. I'll start off by saying that I did think that Spider Man 2 is mediocre. And I mean that in the best way possible too, because I think the main issue that this one has is something that in movies we would call sequelitis. Now, a term is often used to describe something when, let's say, like a movie goes stale, whenever it's just too many sequels or doesn't really have room to grow from the first movie or first video game in this instance. And that is often signifying that we didn't really need a second game, or that nobody really asked for a second game or second movie in terms of movies. But I'll twist that a little bit and say that the first game, again, was one of my favorite games. I loved Miles Morales as well. Maybe not so much the story, but it was fun. And I absolutely was eagerly awaiting a second game. So I absolutely will say that that connotation of it, or that context of not wanting a second game, is definitely not applicable here. But I definitely think there's a lot of things where it feels like it's obligatory in an action open world game. And that's the part where I start to question things of, did we really need this, or did it need to be this length, or why was that included? I had a lot of questions about it, and some of it might be addressed in DLC, and who knows. I look forward to DLC. I'll be playing through that, absolutely. And whenever that comes out, just hopefully it addresses some of the issues, or some updates will address it too. The story of the first game is a true classic. I mean, Doc Ock and Peter have such a great relationship in really any iteration. That's animation, and comics, in movies. And we saw a fantastic iteration with Alfred Molina and Tobey Maguire in the Sam Raimi movies. So it just makes sense that that's a classic story that you would reiterate or showcase in a video game. And it was done amazingly well. They even got the Rogues Gallery in there with the Sinister Six. We fought them, fought Rhino. We got a lot of different villains in there. And that for me is a top tier game because it's strong gameplay, but it also has great characters. I think Yuri in the game is really fun and great introduction to that character. The DLC for her was pretty creative, and I was very excited to anticipate like what they would do with her next. And then for Silver Sable, I was also excited because I like Silver Sable as a character, but she doesn't really get to showcase or shine without feeling tacked on to a lot of things. But she's actually made probably the most appearances in games alongside like Black Cat and Venom. Like Silver Sable is right alongside that, I think. So coming in here, I think that this game, with its side missions and side stories, was substantially weaker. Now, I don't mean that to say that I think they're all bad or that they're horrible, but I do feel like they are weaker in the sense that a lot of it feels like that obligatory portion that I mentioned, where because it's an open world game, because it's an action game where you have to fight villains going around or enemies are going around the city, you have to make entire army factions or groups of enemies to fight. So it was the Spider Hunters and Silver Sable Army and things like that. That's understandable. But ones here I felt were kind of shoehorned in. And maybe that's not the right word, but I think Craven and his hunters, that felt really weird. I mean, I enjoyed fighting them, but the concept of it himself is strange because Craven is known for just being him. The challenge is that can he defeat the bad guy? So whenever there's a group of armies, a group of people, just enemies, that part feels really tacked on. Maybe it's something from the comics. Again, I don't know everything from the comics. He's definitely more known for him being the main guy and him being the one that challenges. So it's really strange for him to basically push everything onto the rest of them. And we see Craven shine for a good chunk by himself. But he doesn't do that for a lot of it. Maybe it's just it tries to build up his appearance, but I didn't get that. And it really just made me feel like he was just pushing everything to his lackeys. And That's no fun. That's not cool. What's also strange is Sandman pieces. I mean, I don't know what the heck that is about. Obviously, he can make a bunch of different versions of himself, but it felt really strange that there was just a bunch of different Sandman areas basically that you'd have to fight, and that part for me was also, it felt just, it tacked on. Like, out of so many different characters, I guess you chose to do Sandman, I guess, but that doesn't feel like it's very creative for me, at least. I did like his story, like Sandman's story. I wish they would have done actually more with it rather than just speeding up and getting chunks of him, but it's whatever. The symbiotes, I think they make the most sense, but both in a good and bad way. Good in the sense that it makes sense. There's a bunch of symbiotes and different versions of symbiotes. We saw where I think it's bad is that to start with that, it's, first of all, they're not all going to get introductions, of course, but it makes it less special whenever you introduce just a bunch of symbiotes from the get-go. We have Venom, obviously, and another well-known one is Carnage. Just recently we saw him appear in the movies, and apart from that, he's not appeared in any other movies, and he did appear in the Amazing Spider-Man 2 video game, which I played that game. I actually enjoyed it a lot. Even enjoyed the first game of that one too. Not perfect games by any means, very janky, very sloppy, very messy, but there's a lot of good that game did. It was really strange for them to do symbiotes like as an enemy faction, because now and there's a tease for Yuri whenever she fights like the Flame, and then basically one of the guys is Cletus Cassidy. I think that at the very end it teased Cletus Cassidy. I think that part, honestly, I like the Yuri DLC, and for them to do basically lump her into, she's trying to just take on the Flame. Maybe she fights other groups, I don't even know, but the main thing is she fights the Flame. Not very interesting to go from where the DLC was to this. I don't think the Flame is really anything special. I mean, I get the idea. It's a cult. It's just I don't think that it's very interesting. I also don't like the teases, and here's why. Because if I like the Yuri storyline from game 1, and then of course nothing was gonna happen in Miles Morales the game, but then I go into this game and this is all they do with her. She's basically just fighting bad guys. That's the story. It doesn't really even have the impact of her wanting to kill them or do anything like that, or they mention it, but the impact is entirely gone. It's just completely destroyed. And so whenever now I see teases for the next game or anything like that, I think, especially for this one, for Carnage, I'm like, well, now it's less special. You introduced a bunch of symbiotes, so what are you gonna do? Symbiotes again as the main villains? No, I doubt it. Carnage is the main villain? I doubt it. So then what's the next thing? It'd be symbiotes again as an enemy faction, and you're gonna have Carnage as a boss of one of the side missions? That's incredibly lame. I don't like that at all. Maybe they twist that and they change it, but that's where I started to lose a little bit of faith in what they would do with Yuri and what they would do with Carnage. Carnage, of course, he's a bigger character, so maybe they do something different, but it's not very promising whenever your follow-up to a really solid DLC pack is you just lump them into a side story, and it's not even a great one. But it feels like it's such a downgrade from where the game came from. But again, I feel like that's something that is an issue with an open world action game is, well, you have a bunch of storylines. Where are you going to put them in? You can't put them into your main story, so you put it into a side story, and you can't put too much time into the side story because now it's going to take a long time. My opinion has changed from when I beat it. When I beat the game, I immediately thought this is like a 6, maybe a 7, but definitely a 6. And that's because of the main thing, the story. The story here, I feel, is easily the worst part of the game. There might be like one other thing that I might say is like the worst part of the game, actually, because it's not even fun. But the story, as far as like overall package, I think is the weakest part. Maybe I'll say that. Maybe not the worst part, but the weakest part. And that's because I don't see a reason for deviating from the story that most people know. Harry in this one turns to Venom, and the symbiote does basically the same thing, but the story is Harry is sick, so he has to use some kind of science experiment or just whatever. They're trying to find a cure. That's understandable. Hey, I get it. And I mean, we all saw the tease at the end of the Spider-Man game of the first one, and I don't think a lot of people entirely connected or really were maybe thinking that, yeah, it's Harry's gonna be Venom. I saw it and I was like, please don't do this. don't have Harry as Venom. But I'm open to it because I think it gives Harry more to do, but I think it has to do with the execution in this game that didn't really hit with me. Because I come back to, well, why? Why are you doing the change? Changes in movies, changes to Origins, changes in comics, everything's going to be different. It's going to be different iterations. So it's not even like an issue with me being a purist of the storyline, but I also don't see the purpose of changing it to Harry rather than Eddie Brock, rather than anything there. And the story, people are going to get so bothered by me saying this, is pretty much The Amazing Spider-Man 2. There's some like little changes in there, but this is basically The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where Harry is sick, or his dad is sick in that movie, I think it was. And so they're trying to get a cure, and in the movie it's I think Spider-Man's blood that can regenerate quicker or whatever. In this game, not necessarily Spider-Man, but he then gets the suit or the symbiote from Harry, and Peter notices that it has all this negative aspects to it, so he doesn't want to give it back to Harry, but Harry needs it. He's dying, and so he gives it back, and then he kind of hates Peter, and then he becomes Venom. The Venom design, I will say, it's excellent, but that's the part where it deviates for me. Is Venom is exactly like any iteration that we've noticed. The only thing different is that Harry is Venom in this one. Weirdly enough, I try to see like, hey, is this from the comics or something? Am I missing something? Because why would you choose this? Because going back to Amazing Spider-Man 2, we didn't see Harry in the first movie, and like, I don't know if it's deleted scenes or something, we didn't see him, and Dane DeHaan just comes over here in the second movie, and they had to do this whole thing of introducing him. Hey, we're best friends, right? Remember when we did this? Remember that? Yeah, that's fun. That's exactly what they had to do in this movie, and it kind of feels like you're just putting yourself more work to do it, because now you have to build up that relationship from scratch and flashbacks, and you have to go through that. And those missions, they weren't bad, but you're putting yourself more work, because now you have to build up that relationship, build up that bond, and in the end, for what reason? Because here's the thing that I see is different. Apart from Venom being Venom, what's the change that it is? Venom acts the same exact way, whether it's Harry or whether it's Eddie Brock. And honestly, Eddie Brock you could have just done, because it's an older Peter. Maybe he doesn't work at the Bugle so much anymore or anything like that. But just why not just do that iteration? You could still do Harry. Maybe do Harry, save him honestly for the third game, but just introduce Harry in this game. Say he's sick, I'm looking for a cure, it's not working. And realistically, actually, the metaphor for Venom is drug abuse, or like substance abuse and addiction. And the same thing can work for the Green Goblin serum. So for me, it doesn't make a lot of sense that they opted for this, because you can actually cut the beginning part with Harry and do like some minor tweaks, have it be Eddie Brock, and the rest of it is the exact same. We've seen that, and the argument could be made, well, they wanted to do something different. Why are you bothered by them trying to change it up a little bit? I'm not bothered by them trying to change it up, but if you're not going to do something worth its salt with that change, then I honestly say don't even do it, because what's the point? You're not doing something substantial enough to change it. And then the argument there could be, well, they wanted to just change a little bit because people would be mad if you change the whole thing. And so the change here is so ridiculous and non-impacting that it's basically like you did it for no reason, because again, that could be Eddie Brock and you could still have the Green Goblin serum. Honestly, I would have preferred if they did Eddie Brock's story, and in this game they build up the relationship for Harry Osborn. And actually, I did look it up where Harry Osborn actually became Venom, and it's not really been a comic thing, but it did happen in the animated series. I think it's the Ultimate Spider-Man TV series on Disney that this is basically the most expansive Harry Venom has ever been used. And again, I'm not saying like, if you're a fan of the show, be a fan of the show, you know, but what a weird place to take things from The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and from an animated show. What a weird pick. And that's not to say like some things aren't good to take stuff from, like the whole personality change, that's from the animated series. As far as the symbiote with Peter, personality change is straight up from that show. I'm not feeling. I don't see the point to this change, and maybe that's just me, but I really did not care for this story. But you also burn different storylines along the way, because early on he gets Harry is he's kind of like hero, and he gets an Agent Venom suit and he's alongside it. They don't call him Agent Venom, but that's what it is. And now you just burned the Eddie Brock storyline, you just burned the Flash Thompson storyline, and you also basically get rid of the Kraven Last Hunt storyline. So now you can't do that story. You can do honestly kind of an underwhelming iteration of that. But you also burn a lot of the villains alongside the way, even for the Kraven storyline, of course, that eventually becomes the Venom storyline. You kill off a bunch of his rogues gallery, and now you can't use those villains. The things like Connors, them wanting to make him into Lizard again, that, I mean, I can understand. But things like Tombstone, like dude is not even a villain anymore, and you're hunting him instead of Spider-Man who defeated him. Go for the big one. Go for the big guy. You're Craven. You're supposed to go for the big guy. That's the whole point. At this point, at that part, I'll understand. I'm just nitpicking with it. The other part of it that I didn't care for and started going on that tangent there with the story. Another thing I felt is lacking in this game is suits. What is up with the selection of suits? I get not wanting to do the same exact suits, but you cannot excuse having this many MCU suits. You also have Miles Spider-Verse suits, but only a Noir Peter Spider-Verse suit? Why is there not a Peter B. Parker suit? And maybe DLC will add some suits, but this allotment here that is already built into the game is super weak. The way that they excuse it is that there's like color variants or color swap suits to basically have more suits than there actually are, or just to say that there's more suits. Some of them are good, some of them are comic references, but they're just different colorways for the most part. That I don't care for. Why is there not a Last Stand suit? Why is there not a Peter Dark Ages suit whenever Miles gets one? Miles looks cool. I'll admit, he looks cool in that Dark Ages suit, but why does Peter not get one? If you're gonna do Dark Ages, do a Peter Dark Ages suit. Give him one too. But Peter just gets a bunch of MCU suits. Why is the Night Monkey suit there? The stealth suit. Why is that one there? Why is the black and gold suit? That's not even a real suit. It's just his regular suit flip. It makes no sense. I get having those suits in, but then don't have those suits and compromise having other suits like Last Stand, one of my favorite suits, or the Mark II suit, or the really just why don't you have any suits here? Why is the majority of them, or a good chunk of them, only MCU? These MCU ones should be extras. And I saw an interview with the director of the game saying, first thing we did is we wanted to put the Marvel movie suits because people would be angry that we didn't. But you did that at the sacrifice of all the other suits. It just doesn't make sense for me. Honestly, not a good thing. I think the first game suits are a lot better. And again, I get not wanting to do the same suits again, but I liked my suits in Spider-Man the way I like the Super Smash Brothers roster is get bigger, get better, have more suits, have more options. Don't remove suits, at least not a bunch of the fan favorite suits, and then give us these color options as the best thing. And I'll say the Miles Morales suit isn't great, like whenever he hits update one, but my bigger issue is like where's the introduction to that? Maybe it got cut off or something and it just kind of tacked on, because it is a partnership that they had, I think, with Adidas, and that's why it's kind of tacked onto there, because it literally is tacked on to it. That's why it feels that way. But introduce it better, or just have it in an option if legally you have to do it like as part of the story. Have a better introduction for it, because that was not it. The suit is all right, like it takes some time to get used to it, but it's still not even close to one of the best suits in the game. Definitely not. Let's turn to a positive note here though. This is where the game goes from a solid 6 to where I ended when I first finished the game story, to a strong 7, almost 8 at gameplay. Story may bring it down substantially for me, and with teases from game 1 being underwhelming, I can't be as excited for game 3 with this game's new teases. However, I can always rest assured that the gameplay will be refined to a T. Miles is quick and snappy. He really does feel like a much quicker Spider-Man. His powers are even more accentuating of that detail. It works really well to differentiate Peter and Miles from each other. The abilities are also much quicker to use, just hitting L1 or R1 and using a face button to match with the ability, rather than a slow down window or slow down scroll wheel. I go back to play Spider-Man 1 and the scroll wheel still doesn't bother me. Like, it's not really, like, it doesn't slow down the gameplay for me, but it is very different in the actual like fighting, because you just click it and it's automatically there. Web wings are also an extremely welcome new ability here too, used in this game mostly for traversal, and then again for some of the worst side missions in the franchise. I went ahead and used the chase option to just make them way easier and get them over with, for like chasing the robotic bird. Don't like those side missions at all, and so I just did that. I don't want to play those again. If I ever have an option to cut them from a game, I will. I also did use the QuickTime event skip, which in this game is way in abundance. I don't think they add anything to the game, and I don't think having the QuickTime automatic skip removed anything from the game. It is funny when you have them off though, because the game will still have the slowdown effect whenever it's supposed to be the QuickTime event. But of course, if they're off, there's no actual buttons to push. it'll just do the event for you, but it is it still slows down. So, and it really, whenever you play it again and you turn that off, you see how many QuickTime events there are, and it is crazy. There's just too many. And the thing with QuickTime events, the reason I don't like them is because it doesn't take skill, it takes timing, and timing for QuickTime events is not about skill. You just sometimes mash a button, sometimes you just press it right on time. That's not skill for me. Doesn't make me feel like that's the Spidey sense. It doesn't make me feel like that Spidey sense. It feels like something, again, it's just an action game. And so I turned that off, and honestly, I don't feel like I'm missing anything. So if you're bothered by me turning on QuickTime events, you've got bigger things to worry about, don't worry about it. This game also does have a lot of options where you can go right alongside with visual options. You have performance and fidelity mode, just like the first game, and also like the remasters. So you can go with like higher quality visuals or higher frame rate. And I usually opted for performance because it just feels smoother for swinging. But I did play this game in a bunch of different ways. I played it on PlayStation Remote Play on a different phone. So I was seeing it from like my home Wi-Fi, from a different house Wi-Fi, and then I went to the office. I played there for some time, just going through like side missions, and when it works, it works. And honestly, the game even looks good there. So it's more so like it's gonna tell you if it works, it's gonna work. If it is not gonna work, it won't really load the game. So my time with it, 99% of the time it worked, and I didn't have any issues with it. I used it to play most of the game, honestly, on that version, but I did also play a good chunk of it on just a standard TV in performance mode. And then towards the end of the game, I was like, you know what, I gotta try out these other updated options, and so I plugged it into a gaming monitor so I can play at higher frame rates, higher quality, and it looks incredible. Honestly, that's never been one of my concerns here. I think the games all look pretty similar. I played the PS4 version, I played it on PC for the remastered. I'm not gonna get into like the model changes and things like that. Mary Jane, I think it looks better. I think Harry Osborn is kind of ugly. Peter, I guess he's kind of grown on me. Miles, I mean, what can I say? He looks like Miles, talks like Miles, just feels like Miles. Everybody else looks all right. Harry, I think I wish they'd really gone like more distinct like hairstyle. Kind of looks like a regular. Maybe that's what they want, who knows? But I didn't have any issues with playing any of the versions. So if you have remote play, you tried it and it works good for you, I would say if you want to play Spider-Man remotely, because it's not on Steam yet and it's not on any other version to play on PC, it works perfectly fine. Remote play works perfectly fine. If you're trying it on the portal, I haven't tried it out. I'm not sure if I'll even get that, but it should be fine. Overall, I think the game is all right. It's very mediocre in big chunks, and it's held up by parts that nobody expected to be worse. Gameplay is the strongest, with the fighting refined to the best I've seen. Swinging and now web wings are fun to use, mostly. I don't know why people are saying to turn off swinging assistance. It makes it more of like a struggle. Maybe it's more realistic, I guess, because it pivots it more to like the buildings where you're swinging from. But that made it more of a struggle for me, and that's, in my opinion, not as fun. And first playing Spider-Man games, I'm trying to have fun. Overall, my bigger issues, I would say actually, is story. I think it's really weak, and I think the first game holds up incredibly well overall in the grand scheme of the mythos. The second game, not so much. So my final rating of the game is going to be a 7, but it's a high 7. So almost an 8, not quite there. Game 1 still beats it for me. I like the Miles Morales missions. A lot of people have been saying that they don't care for them, but I like the Miles Morales missions. I like Mary Jane's missions. I like Peter's stories for the most part, but the main story is just where it falters for me. But that's what my thoughts are of the game. What do you think of the game? Am I completely wrong? Am I off base here? Is the game better than what I'm saying? Do you actually think this is 10 out of 10? What are your issues with it? Maybe you hated this game. Maybe you thought I'm being too generous to it. What you think? Let me know down in the comments, and yeah, again, tell me if I'm wrong. Make sure to like, subscribe if you think I am some sort of correct, if I have some sort of validity in this. Validate me, come on.